And the problem with me now is that I am doubtful whether I am qualified enough to speak on a problematic and enigmatic philosopher like Nietzsche. Anyhow, my intention is to share what I know about Nietzsche and how Nietzsche has become a formidable force in cultural or literary theory and modern literature. That is my topic. So, I'm again, telling you that I am speaking to you what I know about Nietzsche, because he is that much an enigmatic philosopher. And if we consider the history of literary studies, especially literary criticism and theory, the 20th century is perhaps the most productive and the most tumultuous period, a very productive period in the history of literary studies. Because the entire literary scenario witnessed unprecedented developments in the 20th century. And what is most striking was the transformation from literary criticism to literary theory. Literary criticism to literary theory. And so this kind of a metamorphosis took place in the first half of the 20th century itself. And before that, we had a long tradition of literary criticism, starting from Plato or Aristotle to the critics of the 19th century, or more precisely, critics of the first decades of the 20th century, like T.S. Eliot, F.R. Lewis, and others. So there we can see a long tradition of literary criticism. But something happened at the beginning of the 20th century, and so people started rethinking about the validity of criticism, and this criticism was based on a philosophy called liberal humanism. And this liberal humanist philosophy was put under question at the beginning of the 20th century. And what is this liberal humanism? So this term is very important, liberal humanism, and this is the philosophical bias of literary criticism. And what is liberal and what is humanism? So that is a very important question. So in this particular context, liberal means not politically motivated. Liberal in the sense not politically motivated or not politically committed. And this is the significance of the first term, being apolitical. That means something that is beyond politics. A non-commitment on the part of criticism to be apolitical. And so this is the meaning of the first term, liberal. And then there is another significance, another term, humanism. Why humanism? What is human and what should be considered as human? And after all, we shall ask the question, is humanism something good or bad? Is it good or bad? What do you say? What do you think? Is it good or bad, humanism? Oh, come on. What do you say? Is it good or bad, humanism? Good or bad? Good. But the problem is that whether it is good or bad depends on who defines it. You got it? And who must be considered as humans? That's the question. And you know, at a particular period in the history of Western civilization, women were not considered as human beings. You got it? Women were not considered as human beings. And even some enlightened philosophers were not ready to consider the black people as human beings. Then who are humans? So that's the question. So when we think about the human, everything human is defined in terms of the white heterosexual middle class people. They are considered as human beings. And their values are projected as humanistic values. And so that's why I told you that whether humanism is good or bad depends on who defines it. And this kind of a rethinking took place in the beginning of the 20th century. And again, let us reconsider that term liberal. And I told you that it means not politically committed. But my question is it possible? Is it possible to be apolitical? Being political does not mean that you are the member of a particular party, a political party. Politics means your opinions, your observations, your priorities, your preferences all come under politics. Which means the moment you open your mouth to say something, you are articulating a kind of politics. And so, then is it possible to be apolitical? So that is also impossible. And both these two sins are there with criticism. And a rethinking about such values finally culminated in the development of what is called a literary theory. So this was the transformation that took place in the beginning of the 20th century. And so theory evolved, a literary theory evolved, which is speculative, which is self-reflexive. And so we have, a parade of literary theories like formalism, structuralism, psychoanalytical criticism. So all those theories developed after this kind of a questioning of liberal humanist bias. But something very shocking happened in the 1960s. And what is special about 1960s was that there developed a kind of radical rethinking about the very foundation of thinking itself, the very foundation of human thinking itself. And this was clearly stated in that famous essay by the post-structuralist philosopher Jacques Derrida. That essay, Structure, Sign and Play in the Discourse of Human Sciences. Derrida spoke about an epistemological break. So this was how he, opened that article, that paper, Structure, Sign and Play in the Discourse of Human Sciences. He said that something happened in the history of the concept of structure which could be called an event. So this was a rupture. What is a rupture? Rupture is a break. Rupture is a break, which means it is not a mere, break in the discourse, but it is an epistemological break. And what is this epistemological break? What is epistemology after all? Epistemology is the science of knowledge. The science of knowledge. It is a science of knowledge. And epistemology refers to certain foundations, certain fixed points of reference with which we are trying to understand the world. And that is what is called epistemology. And knowledge acquisition is not actually an impartial objective activity. What should be considered as knowledge and what should be taken as knowledge is again something political. And so that those foundations were put under question after this epistemological break. And this is what Derrida termed as the rupture. Why? And it is in this point that we have to consider Friedrich Nietzsche, because Nietzsche was responsible for this epistemological break. And this was again stated by Derrida, because Derrida said that with the epistemological break, the structurality of structure began to be rethought. The structurality of structure began to be rethought after this epistemological break. So what is the meaning of that sentence? The structurality of structure. So I am actually elaborating all these things because so many students are here. And that is why I am actually elaborating on these things. So what should be considered as a structure, and what is the structurality of structure? So in structuralism, according to the structuralist philosophers, behind every empirical phenomenon, there is a noble structure. So behind every empirical phenomenon, there is a noble structure according to the structuralist. And it is the structure that gives meaning to the event. So I shall make this clear with an example from linguistics. So because structuralism as a theory was based on Saussurian linguistics. And in Saussurian linguistics, there are two concepts like lang and parole that correspond to the surface structure and the deep structure. So for example, in language, every construction is validated by a structure. Without structure, the construction will become meaningless. So take the case of this sentence: Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. Shakespeare wrote Hamlet. Or all the world is a stage. These are constructions. And these constructions are made possible how? With a structure. Like Shakespeare is the subject, which is followed by wrote, which is the verb, and which in turn is followed by the object, which is Hamlet. So subject plus verb plus object, this pattern is there, which is a deep structure of the construction. And that construction was validated by this deep structure. You got it? So that means structuralists believe that all those structures are stable structures are ultimate. They are ultimate. So that means this is the case with the linguistics. But when we think about culture in all aspects, in all its aspects can be studied like what? A language. And so that means language has rules, and rules have expressions in language, and in the same way, in every culture there is a grammar. There is a grammar. The unwritten rules that define those culture can be termed as its grammatical structure. And so those structures are considered as ultimate up to that particular moment in history. But after that, there was a radical rethinking about the structurality of structure, which was because of the impact of Nietzsche's philosophy. And again, though Nietzsche lived in the 19th century, the majority of his works were translated into French during the 1950s and 60s. And it was then that the French intelligentsia came into direct contact with the writings of Nietzsche. And so this contact, the French philosophers' contact with Nietzschean philosophy was responsible for the break or the rupture that Derrida referred to at the beginning of his paper, Structure, Science and Play in the Discourse of Human Sciences. And so, according to Derrida, three persons were responsible for that epistemological break. One was, of course, the Nietzsche, the other one was Heidegger, and the third one was Freud. So these three persons were responsible for the epistemological break that took place in the 1960s. And now, what was so fascinating and striking about Nietzsche that actually paved way for this kind of a rethinking? And it is here we have to understand the significance of Nietzschean philosophy. And again, was Nietzsche a philosopher? That is the question. Was Nietzsche a philosopher? So we can say that he was not a philosopher but an anti-philosopher. Nietzsche was an anti-philosopher. Why anti-philosopher? Nietzsche tried to question the very foundations of philosophy. So that is what he did. That is what makes him different from all other philosophers of his lineage. So he tried to question the foundations of philosophy. So that is why we can say that he is an anti-philosopher, one who speaks about the foundations of philosophy. And so he says that all philosophers are liars. All philosophers are liars. Why? Because they are teaching us what? How to reject the present world in which we live for the sake of a non-existent world. So this is what is actually an offensive about other philosophers. They try to teach us, or they try to prove that the world in which we live is only an imitation of some other world, and so this world is this world can be rejected in favor of something else, a non-existent world. So this is the sin committed by philosophers according to Nietzsche. So they have taught us to reject the present world for the sake of something non-existent. So for example, religion and morality will say that there must be something that is awaiting you after death, and you will be fine after death because God will take you to heaven, and so you will be okay with that particular situation. But at the same time, you have to endure, you have to tolerate, and you have to bear all those injustices and all those sufferings that you are actually facing in life. And when you think like that, you are rejecting the present world for the sake of a non-existent world. And take the case of Aristotle's philosophy. Aristotle said that this world is only an imitation of an ideal world, and that means there must be another world called ideal world. Then this world is only the imitation of that ideal world. In all these cases, we can say that they are teaching us to reject the present world for the sake of a non-existent world. And this is how the history of philosophy proved to be a history of cheating, deception, and treachery. So he again considered philosophy as a foreground philosophy. Every philosophy is a foreground philosophy because every philosophy conceals another philosophy. When you are rejecting the present world for the sake of its own problems, I mean, you suffer a lot and you are actually facing a lot of injustices in the world, but you are taught to consider them as natural. And because you are actually rejecting this world for the sake of a non-existent world. So thus philosophers are liars according to Nietzsche. So this is how he started questioning the foundations of philosophy. And it is here we have to consider the difference between the two concepts of being and becoming in Nietzsche. What is being and what is becoming? So, being means the state of, that means existence. It is a state of existence, being, which is static and which is unchanging. It is an unchanging essence that exists. This is being. And what is becoming? Becoming is changing and dynamic. In that sense, it is dynamic. Becoming is dynamic and changing and historical. It is a kind of progression from one point to another. But being is static and it is a state of being. You got it? And so that means the state of being evades the kind of progression, dynamics and historicity. And all philosophers of the past dealt with what? Being. They dealt with being, so that means they tried to abstract what? Something static, something everlasting, something permanent. And so, by doing so, they are trying to, or they have tried to mummify their thoughts. Their thoughts. They have tried to mummify their thoughts. And at the same time, many of them were not ready to consider the other aspect, becoming. Becoming is actually a state of progression, change from one thing to another. And so that becoming has been forgotten and neglected by other philosophers. Majority of them were concerned about being, and by doing so, they have tried to mummify their ideas, and that means so that their ideas must be preserved for future. So this was what they did, what the other philosophers did. And so it is here Nietzsche initiated his critique of philosophy, and that's why I told you that he was an anti-philosopher, one who questioned the foundations of philosophy. And now, so again here, these are also a very difficult concepts like life and morality. So what is life and what is morality? And here, life, you have to imagine life as something characterized by a lot of intensities, a lot of possibilities, multiplicities, and the like. This is what life is, which is uncertain, which is characterized by disorder and, which is characterized by uncertainty, full of energies, intensities, potentialities, possibilities. So that is what is called the life. A primordial, existence. But that life, since that life is chaotic and uncertain, characterized by disorder, we have to tame that kind of a life. How? Using what he called morality. Using what he called morality. So we have to distinguish between these two things, life and morality, and he actually supports what is called a life. And this life is full of intensities, full of possibilities, full of multiplicities, which cannot be, tamed by a single logic. That life, that is what is called a life, which is uncertain. But in actual life, we try to overcome the uncertainty of life by inventing a lot of metaphors in terms of morality. We invented values for what? To make life possible. So this is what we did. So for example, take the case of time. Time is an uncertainty. It is a great uncertainty. It is a kind of uncertainty, and in this, how did we overcome this uncertainty of time? And again, what is time after all? What is time after all? We will say, now it is 11 o'clock. Is this time? Or we will say, today is 19th of October and this is 2023. Is this year? Is this time? So imagine a situation which is beyond all these things, clock, calendar and the like. That is time, full of uncertainties, and it cannot be tamed. And then to overcome that difficulty or of uncertainty posed by time, we invented what? The clock, the calendar and the like. In fact, the calendar is a great fiction invented by human beings. It's a fiction. Why? So this year is 2023. Who said so? Who said so? Who said that this is 2023? We invented the calendar, and thus we actually structured this uncertainty of time. And then we invented months, days, date, and then we invented the clock. And now we say this is 11:05. Remember, all these categorizations matter to us alone. I mean the human beings alone. Consider the animals, the birds in the sky. Do they know that this is 2023? Do they know that this is, now it is 11 o'clock? So that's the thing. So we wanted to order our life. We wanted to tame the uncertainty of time. That is why we invented the metaphors of stability, like the calendar, the clock, the time and the like. Is it clear now? So that means that uncertain world is there, and then a structure is established imposed over the uncertainty to facilitate life. So this is what happened. And again, the uncertainty of space. So we categorized space in terms of continents, countries, states, districts and villages. But do they exist? There is only two things: the land mass and the ocean, physical entities. But as such, it is an uncertainty. So in order to overcome that kind of an uncertainty, we invented countries, continents and the like. You got it? Relations. So now we have uncle, grandfather, grandmother, niece, nephew, son, daughter, daughter-in-law, father-in-law, all those people are there. Do they exist? This is a way of categorizing people. And by doing so, we are able to attribute subjectivity to those people around us. And beyond that, all these are separate individuals. So thus, our actual life is characterized by uncertainty and disorder, which we try to master using what is called morality. Values. We invented values and moral values and the like. And we even invented God to, guarantee our, moral life. So these are all inventions of the human beings. So that means our life is now structured like that. Our life is structured in terms of those inventions. And now it is not possible for us to think beyond those stable references. Is it clear now? So we are actually trapped in a net created by us. So in the net of time, space and all those things are there, and we are actually really trapped inside those things. Just like the spider. The spider weaves a web and places itself within the net. And in the same way, we create a net and then we place ourselves within the net and we are then moving through that net. So that's the thing. So this is what, Nietzsche opposes. He wants to return to that life which is full of intensities, potentialities. And it is in this, and it is here we can see this, the impact of Nietzsche's thoughts on the two post-Lacanian psychoanalysts, Deleuze and Guattari. Deleuze and Guattari. So hope you are familiar with the name, Gilles Deleuze. And what did Deleuze, say? Deleuze introduced a particular method called schizoanalysis. And he introduced the schizoanalysis against what? Against a Freudian psychoanalysis. So he rejected, Freudian psychoanalysis, and then he accepted what is called the schizoanalysis. No, what is wrong with psychoanalysis? Freud introduced the psychoanalysis as a therapy. Psychoanalysis was a therapy. What was the aim of therapy? The aim of psychoanalysis is to cure mental illness by investigating the interaction between the conscious and the unconscious minds. So this is psychoanalysis, a form of therapy that tries to cure mental illness by investigating the interaction between the conscious and the unconscious minds. That means the real source of many of our mental problems can be traced back to our unconscious. You got it? The real problems can be traced back to our unconscious. Why unconscious? That's the question. Remember, only human beings are susceptible to madness and mental problems. Why? Because we have the unconscious mind, a strong unconscious mind. And why was it created? Or how was it created? Then we have to say through repression. So that means the unconscious mind is created through repression. Why? So when we feel the urges of life, we try to suppress them. So a suppressed feeling is created. And throughout our life, we have to do a lot of such repressions so that we can live in a society. So social life demands that kind of a repression, and because of this repression, an unconscious is formed, and because of the unconscious, mental problems are made. Then, who is the real villain? Who is the real villain here? Why do we repress our feelings? Because they are against morality. They are against morality. And who created morality? We. So the thing is that we treat the mentally ill, and who made them mentally ill? Again we. You got it? And what made them mentally ill? Morality. And who made morality? Again we. We made morality. So this is the problem. So which means, when you say that you are a man, you are expected to behave in a certain way. You got it? That means the label man is a limitation imposed on you. You got it? The label man is a limitation imposed on you. Because you are a man or because you are a woman, you cannot do this, you cannot do that, and because of that, all your possibilities are cut short, reduced, so that you can become a man, a human being. So that means all possibilities are rather suspended, dismissed. And so again, Deleuze once made a very controversial statement, and he once said, if you think that you are a horse, so if you think that you are a horse, don't worry, nothing wrong with you. You are thinking of just another possibility. You are thinking of just another possibility. So you can be a horse, you can be a tiger, you can be a lioness. But no way. Why? Because you are a man, and as a human being, you are expected to behave like this. Which means all your possibilities are reduced, cut short, to suit to the demands of being a man. And it is in this context that Deleuze introduced this concept of schizoanalysis as an antithesis to psychoanalysis. And what is schizoanalysis? Schizoanalysis is full of possibilities, intensities, and the like. Because the schizoid is again not restricted, his scope is not cut short, he is a being with full of possibilities, as we can see in Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch, one who is beyond the human, the Superman or the Overman. Again, an impact of Nietzsche on contemporary literary theory. And then, when we consider Nietzsche in terms of literature, his first major contribution was that book, The Birth of Tragedy. So, what's the significance of this book, The Birth of Tragedy? So here he analyzed the Greek tragedy, the genealogy of Greek tragedy. What is significant about Greek tragedy? And here Nietzsche considered Greek tragedy, early Greek tragedy, as the perfect mode of art. The early Greek tragedy was the perfect mode of art. Why? Because for that you need to understand the history of Greek drama. Drama in general evolved in Greece as part of the festival of Dionysius. As part of the festival of Dionysius. As part of Dionysius. And what is special about Dionysius? Dionysius was the Greek god of wine. The Greek god of wine. And during the festival of Dionysius, there were a lot of merrymaking, merriments, and the like. Wine, a carnivalesque atmosphere was there during the festival of Dionysius. And people were liberated from the moral codes of the day. So they were at liberty to do whatever they like. And so that means they were not bound by the moral codes of the day. A lot of merrymaking, drinking, and all those things took place during the festival of Dionysius, and drama evolved as a kind of festival, as a kind of as part of this festival of Dionysius. Which means, and again in early Greek drama, the chorus played a very important role. The chorus, and so the chorus would sing a song, and the people, the spectators, would also take part in the chorus, and so a lot of such involvement, mass involvement would be there in early Greek drama, and then the performance would be there. And here, according to Nietzsche, in Greek drama we can see the juxtaposition of two Dionysius was the god of wine, the god of, natural instincts, whereas Apollo was the god of order, structure, and all those things. So, these are two conflicting ideas that characterize our life. On one side, our instinctual life is there, and on the other side, we can see what is called a very well-ordered, well-structured principle of life, which can be termed as Apollonian. So, in our context, in Indian context, we can see, and according to some people, we can attribute these two concepts to the Dionysian and Apollonian concepts to our two deities, Shiva and Vishnu. And Shaivam can be, referred to as Dionysian to a certain extent, but not fully, I would say. Because Shiva is a very enigmatic, problematic concept. Why? On one side, he is, natural to the core, because, the very conception of Shivan is, nature itself, is embedded in nature itself. So, like this, head, what is called the Jada, then the moon, the crescent, then the serpent, then the, Ganga, originating from the top of his Jada. So, this is how he was conceptualized, and also his vehicle was this, bull attached to the earth, full of natural energy, productive energy. And again, so when we analyze that image, we can see that that Jada could be seen as nothing but the mountain itself, the Kailas, the mountain itself. And the serpents intertwining around the Jada can be the venomous serpents that live in the mountain. And again, Ganga originated from the top of the mountain. And then at night you can see the crescent attached to the top of the mountain. So he is nature itself to that extent. And on the other side, Vishnu is there, and Vishnu is the god of sthiti, order, system, and structure, and all those things. And so that can be termed as Apollonian. So this is a rough, analogy, of course, I know. But these are two opposing drives in our life. One is attached to nature, and the other is attached to culture. The pull between nature and the culture can be represented in the conflict between the Dionysian and Apollonian cultures. And in ancient Greek tragedy, according to Nietzsche, there was a perfect balancing between the Dionysian and the Apollonian. The Dionysian and the Apollonian. Next slide. Okay. And so, what is the significance of the Dionysian and Apollonian principles? And so, this can be explained with what is called the onion logic. The onion logic. What is the onion logic? In onion logic, you can see the layers of the onion, and on one side it is convex, and on the other side it is concave. One is convex and the other side is convex, concave and convex. So, tragedy has this kind of Greek tragedy has this kind of a structure according to Nietzsche. Greek tragedy. Why? So, this is a somewhat difficult concept to understand. Still, let us try to understand it. So, at the core of the onion, at the center part, there is the idea that individuality is an illusion. Individuality is an illusion. So, this is the shocking realization at the core of the Greek tragedy. Individuality is an illusion. And so, when the spectator encounters this Greek tragedy on one side, I mean on the concave or the convex side, there is a kind of mirroring, and on the other side there is a kind of filtering. Mirroring and filtering. Mirroring and filtering. And at each layer, this kind of a mirroring and filtering takes place. So I shall make it clear. And first we have to understand what is meant by the illusion of individuality. What is meant by the illusion of individuality? Can you next? Okay. So what is the illusion of reality? For that, we have to understand the next. Yes, this concept of self, Nietzsche's concept of self. What is self? And again, here we have to understand that individuality is only an illusion. Individuality is only an illusion produced by language and other structuring mechanisms. You got it? Which means, so this is, I told you this is difficult to understand because this is something contradictory to the foundations of all our knowledge. The thing is that, do I exist? Do I exist? Is it clear now? Do I exist? Do you exist? So that is the question. That means, beyond our individual differences, see, imagine that situation. Beyond our individual differences, I am Rajendran, this is Manu, then Srija teacher, Saumya teacher. Beyond all these individual differences, our intensities, our emotions, our drives, our instincts are the same. If we remove our individualities, our notions, our drives, our instincts are the same. Is it clear now? So, please, try to imagine that situation. Without us, I mean without our individuality, we are one and the same entity, characterized by the same body logic, the same intensities, the same emotions, the same instincts, and the like. And from that kind of a chaotic situation, I invented myself so that I can become an agent. So I actually got what is called the agency. You got it? So take the case of this sentence. I think. This is a grammatical sentence. I think. When I say I think, I is the subject and think is the predicate. Now, who thinks? I. I. So that means I becomes an agent and I get agency, and with which I am performing something, and what I perform is that kind of a thinking. So that means I as an agent is the one that guarantees thinking. Is it true? And then Nietzsche reverses this and he said, it is not I that constitutes thinking, but it is thinking that constitutes I. It is thinking that constitutes I. So this is something related to what Descartes said, cogito ergo sum. This is a Descartesian dictum, cogito ergo sum. What does it mean? I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am is the meaning of cogito ergo sum. So what does it mean? Cogito ergo sum. Why think, therefore I am? Because what I think is myself. അത് മനു കഴിച്ചോ. Yes. So we have been discussing this onion logic, and so again, so what was our last point? Yes, the illusion of the individuality. So that means beyond our individual level, we are all characterized by the same intensities, the same passions, the same emotions, and the same instincts. But when we assume a particular individual role, we become an agency, and so we have to perform something in our life. And this is a kind of illusion. So that means an illusion made out of chaos, an illusion of individuality made out of chaos. That means When that is what we have been discussing. So when I think, I become the guarantee for this kind of a thinking, and this is the conventional thought. But there is Nietzsche reverses this, and Nietzsche says that this thinking makes the I. The thinking makes this I. So this has been, again pointed out by Descartes in his famous dictum, I think, therefore I am, which means what I am is constituted by my thoughts. What I am is constituted by my thoughts. But at the same time, in contemporary discourses, Jacques Lacan reverses this, and he said that I think, therefore I am not. This is what Lacan said. I think, therefore I am not. So this is how he reversed that Descartesian dictum of cogito ergo sum. So Descartes said that I think, therefore I am, which means what I am is constituted by my thoughts. But Lacan says that I think, therefore I am not. Thus he rejected the Descartesian notion of cogito ergo sum. So what does it suggest? When I begin to think, what happens then? When I begin to think, I am using the ideas, thoughts, fixed points of somebody else. So for example, we are thinking in terms of language. So we are thinking in terms of language, and in that sense, language is something given to us, and language is not actually our own invention. It is given to us. Because language was there even before the birth of our great-great-grandfather. And so it was a kind of slot that was already here. And we were born into that kind of a particular slot. And our role as an individual is determined by language. So imagine a situation. Our name, our ethnicity, our identity, and all these things are not our choices. They have been given to us by an already existing agency. You got it? So the thing was that there was a slot for us here, and we were born into that slot. So that means our ideas, our subjectivity was determined by that particular slot which existed here even before our birth. And that was why our ethnicity or our religion or our caste or even our name is not our choice. They have been given to us. And when I think, I am using language. Is it my own invention? No, I am using somebody else's invention to think. So this is how Lacan says, I think, therefore I am not. Because when I begin to think, I cease to exist. Because I am thinking in terms of language which was invented by somebody else, which was a pre-existing entity. So this was how Nietzschean thought influenced contemporary literary theory. So Lacanian position was something similar to that of Nietzsche, because it was Nietzsche who said that this I was again not a guarantee for what he called this kind of thinking in I think. So there is the illusion of the self. What we create as ourselves, it's an illusion. It's an illusion. Myself is an illusion. And so this kind of an illusion is needed. Then only we can perform certain roles in the society or in life. Like what? Like a drama. So like a drama, like a tragedy or like a drama, every character has a role to perform. Because every character is an individual and that individual has a role to perform in the whole structure of the drama. In the same way, if the entire life can be considered as a drama, we are all characters. And we have been assigned with a role. We have been assigned with a role to perform in the drama. So that means this kind of individuality must be there to perform certain tasks in the world. And so this, but at the same time, this individuality is an illusion. And then only the world can be thought in terms of human subjectivity. So to imagine the world in terms of human structures, human capacity for thought, there must be a self and there must be the illusion of a self. And this is something that we created out of the myriad experiences that we have been having in life. And so this self, in fact, is a construct, a metaphor that we created out of multiplicities. And this thought was at the heart of the tragedy. And in the case of this onion logic, at the heart of this onion, this illusion of the individuality was there. And when the spectator sees this drama, he actually finds himself mirrored on the stage as a character. Just like a character on the stage, he is also an individual or a character who has been assigned with a role to perform in the world. This is the mirroring that he experiences. And at the same time, the spectator is preserved from the shock of realizing the illusion of individuality by a kind of filtering through different dramatic techniques in Greek tragedy, like songs, drama, and all such things. And this is how Greek tragedy proved to be a kind of balance between the Apollonian and the Dionysian. Because what is at the core of the Aeneid, or what is at the core of Greek tragedy, is the illusion of individuality. And again, this is the Dionysian principle in the tragedy, the illusion of the individuality, which is Dionysian. And the spectator is preserved from the shock of realizing that kind of an illusion by the Apollonian structure of the drama, that is the structure of the drama in terms of characters, plot, songs, and the like. So this is the kind of filtering that he has. So that's why I told you that in the Aeneid logic, one side is mirroring and the other side is filtering. So mirroring his own individual role in the world, the spectator's own individual role in the world, and at the same time preventing the shock by structuring everything that we see, that we watch on the stage through an Apollonian principle. So this balance was there in Greek tragedy, the balance between the Dionysian and the Apollonian. But after some time, there took place the death of tragedy in Greece itself. Next slide. This we have discussed already. Next. Okay. So, next. So, there is the death of tragedy. What is this death of tragedy? So, again, according to Nietzsche, this kind of a tragedy that was a perfect balance between the Dionysian and the Apollonian principles died out in Greece itself because of the writings of three persons, three important figures. One was Euripides, and the other was Socrates, and the third one was Sophocles. So because of these three persons, Greek tragedy lost that kind of a balance between the Dionysian, and the Apollonian principles. These three persons were responsible for the death of Greek tragedy: Euripides, Socrates, and Sophocles. Why? Because in all the three cases, what was common was that they gave more importance to morality, order, and structure. Thus, they abandoned the Dionysian side of life. They abandoned the Dionysian side of life. So that means after that, Greek tragedy lost its perfect balance between the Dionysian and the Apollonian principles. And so Greek tragedy began to be structured in terms of morality, moral principles, moral policing, and the like. And so it is because of, the writings of these three persons, Euripides, Socrates, and Sophocles. Because they gave more importance to structure, order, morality, values, and all those things. So thus they forgot the Dionysian principles and they gave more importance to the Apollonian principles. So this is how Greek tragedy died. So this is what he said in the birth of the tragedy, which is very significant in understanding literature. And then next. And now his own concept of history, that is also very important in contemporary world. The concept of history, which was very influential in Foucauldian discourse on history or Foucauldian historiography. And so this concept of history was elaborated in his work, that is Anzeitgemäße Betrachtungen, which has been translated into English as Untimely Meditations. Untimely Meditations. And in this work, Betrachtungen, he described what is called the flows of history. The flow of history. The flows or the defects of history. So what is the first defect? History, was concerned about certain values which they consider as unchanging. There are unchanging values. History based on the principle of unchanging values. So they believed in the idea that there are certain values which are unchanging. But Nietzsche rejected this and he said that there are no such values which can be considered as unchanging, because values are subjected to change. Values are subjected to change. And another thing is that history has always been produced from a privileged point of view. History has always been produced from a privileged point of view. And this is what Foucauldian historiography made use of. And so so the thing is that historical periods, as we think, are not logically sequenced events. You got it? So what is history after all? So when we consider history, we have to consider two aspects of the word history. On one side, we can say that history refers to the events of the past. And on the other side, we can say history is telling a story about the events of the past. So these two meanings are there. One is history as the events of the past, and the other is history as telling a story about the events of the past, which is the correct explanation of history. See, if we consider the first thing, history as the events of the past, we have to say that it is an impossibility. Because what had happened in the past had been irrecoverably lost. No way to re-experience those things. History is an impossibility at that as such. But at the same time, the second interpretation still exists, telling a story about the events of the past. That is possible. Telling a story, that is the thing. Telling a story about the events of the past. This is what Foucault said. Telling a story about the events of the past. So when the events got narrativized, so when the event is narrativized, it becomes a text. That is the thing. It becomes a text. So for example, suppose if you are asked to write about this college, can I expect that all your narratives are alike? That's the thing. Because your ideas, your politics, your opinions and all those things are reflected there in your narratives. So that is the problem with the narrative. The narrative is political. The narrative expresses the personal preferences, priorities, ideologies, discourses of the writer. So thus the narrative becomes a story. This is what happens in the electronic channels also. See, in journalistic language, they call it news story. This is news story. Which means it is a story about the news. News story. This is the term that they use. You got it? So this is how history becomes narrativized. So for example, if somebody asks King Charles, "Oh Lord, do you prefer tea or to coffee? Do you prefer tea or coffee?" And if he say, "I prefer coffee," different kinds of narratives can be made out of this situation. Next day, the newspapers will report, "King Charles hates tea." A narrative. King Charles hates tea. You got it? And again, another incident, that really, took place in the world. Once, Pope visited Mexico. And some people told him that in Mexico, not Mexico, Cuba. And some people told him that, there were a lot of brothels in Cuba. And the next day, and again, when he reached Cuba, he asked the people, "Are there so many brothels here?" And the next day, the newspapers reported, "The Pope in search of a brothel." So this was how the narrative is made. A narrative is made. This is how historical events are narrated. And again, the thing is that, what is history after all? So when we consider history as a block, we can see that it is neatly structured and ordered. So as students of English literature, we are familiar with the different types of ages in England, in English history. Like the Elizabethan age, the Jacobean age, then the Augustan age, Romantic age, then the Victorian age. So different ages are there in the history of English literature. But my question is, did they exist? Did they exist? So that is the question. When we stand in the 21st century or when we stand in the 20th century, it is possible for us to identify the different stages in history. But the problem was that the Elizabethans did not know that they were Elizabethans. Good? They did not know that they were Elizabethans because they were called so by people living in another historical location. So that when standing in a particular historical location and looking back, it was easy for us to identify the different ages in history. And God knows by what name we will be designated in future. You got it? And again, the thing is that, again, another problem with history is that, take the case of Elizabethan England, for example. Is it Elizabethan England? My question is it Elizabethan England that created Shakespeare's plays, or is it Shakespeare's plays that created Elizabethan England? That's a problematic question. Is it Elizabethan England that created Shakespeare's plays? So several historians or literary historians express the idea that his plays were shaped by Elizabethan England. But can it be the other way around? Elizabethan England was created by literature. So that means as students of English literature, we have very colorful, beautiful, romantic ideas about Elizabethan England. And from where did we get those ideas? From the plays of Shakespeare? From the poems of Spenser? So this is how the relationship between fact and fiction is rather unstable. The relation between fact and fiction is rather unstable. So we cannot say that this is fact, this is the truth. No such truth exists. This is a particular version. That thing is a particular version of truth and not the absolute truth. And then a particular version is accepted as ultimate and stable, and it is considered, that category is considered as what? Truth. So this is how he contradicts this idea of truth. Nietzsche contradicts the idea of truth. And then again in Thus Spake Zarathustra, he introduces this concept of Übermensch in after the declaration of the death of God. The Iranian philosopher Zarathustra. Zarathustra was an Iranian philosopher, a pre-Arabic Iranian prophet, Zarathustra. And Zarathustra declared the death of God. And he said, Zarathustra said, God is dead. There are no universal values like truth, beauty, or goodness. And this actually became the foundation for the existentialist philosophy. And then, after the declaration of the death of God, he offered an alternative in the name of Übermensch, Overman or Superman. Overman or Superman. And so here, in Thus Spake Zarathustra, so here, what is the significance of this Übermensch? And again, several people, considered this as a Nietzschean statement that God is dead. But the thing was that what he, intended by this death of God was the death of a Christian God. So that means God as envisaged in Christian theology was dead. That is what he said. God as envisaged in Christian theology, a God who, dictates rules, moral principles and all such things to people, so that all their immense possibilities are curtailed and cut short. Such a God ceased to exist. That is what he said. That is what he meant by the statement, God is dead. God is dead. So the thing is that a God who is a dictator, who dictates moral principles, a moral way of life, and that kind of a God ceased to exist. And especially in the modern world. And again, I told you in The Birth of the Tragedy, he said that tragedy declined in Greece. But later, in the age of modernity, Nietzsche said that the death of tragedy took place some 2000 years ago, but a rebirth of tragedy took place in the age of modernity, especially in the place of operas of Richard Wagner, a German operatist. And Wagner's Tristan and Isolde was mentioned in T.S. Eliot's poem, The Wasteland. So, Tristan and Isolde, a Wagnerian opera. So, this, the death of the God is actually the death of a Christian concept of God, a God who is a dictator, one who dictates moral principles and morality and all such things. And after this death of God, he offered an alternative, and that is what is called the Übermensch, or the man who is a superman or an overman. It's the exact translation is overman, because Über in German means above. Over and above. That is what is meant by Über. Übermensch means a man who is above, an overman. And what does it mean, overman? So, this overman is a man full of potentialities, not again reduced by the real concepts of humanity, of the real conditions for being a man. And that kind of an entity is called Übermensch. A man who is, actually some other interpretation is that a tall man with full of abilities, potentialities, a talented man. So, again, what he intended was a man with all his potentialities, all possibilities, before being reduced by the conditions for being a man. And that kind of a situation, that kind of a person was called Übermensch. And then he said that man functioned as a bridge between what? Life and the Überman. So that means a man must strive to become what? A superman, an Übermensch, one who exists with all potentialities and possibilities. So man is a rope with which we can reach this realm of the superman. So that means we have to transcend the limitations imposed on us for just being man. And then only we become Übermensch, or the overman. And he can replace God. That means the God after the death of God. And this is what he called Übermensch. And such a kind of Übermensch can be seen in the novel The Heart of Darkness. In The Heart of Darkness, a man who was not regulated by the controls of civilization and culture. Who was that man? Quds. Quds in Heart of Darkness can be considered as a man, as a superman, and Überman, who is with full of potentialities, who is untouched by the morality of the moral principles of the Europeans, and who keeps himself away from the civilizational boundaries, one who enjoys life to the core, one who enjoys life in all its multiplicities and intensities, and that person is Quds, and Quds can be considered as a kind of Übermensch, one who transcends his boundaries. Another literary example of this Übermensch, or this crossing the boundaries or liminal experience, can be seen in the character of Tiresias in The Wasteland. And what is special about Tiresias? So he is blind, he is bisexual, he lived part of his life as man and part of his life as man. Hope you are familiar with those stories. So Tiresias, the potentialities of Tiresias, he was blind, he was immortal, and he lived part of his life in this world and part of his life in the other world. He lived part of his life as man and part of his life as woman. So thus, a figure who cuts across all such limitations and boundaries imposed on an ordinary man. Such a character was Tiresias in the Wasteland. And again, another literary influence of Nietzsche can be seen in Thomas Mann's novel, Death in Venice, Der Tag in Venice. So that is the Death in Venice, in which the character Aschenbach, the central character of the novel Aschenbach, was actually fed up with his life, a life, which was actually controlled by so many moral scruples, principles, and the like. And so he wanted to escape from that kind of a life, and so he went to Venice, and so there he met a boy called Tadzio, a Polish boy called Tadzio, and then he felt some kind of a sexual attraction to the boy. So this is again something against the heteronormative principles of the society, the homosexual desire that he felt for that boy Tadzio. So this is how he again reacted against the heteronormative morality of the Western civilization. A lot of such historical experiences literary experiences can be there, and these were again definitely next. No, back. Yes, still back. Okay. So I think it's time. 12:30. Okay. So a lot of such experiences can be seen. I mean, literary experiences can be seen there, where we can see the formidable influence of Nietzsche, and so all these things, I mean, thinking revolutionized the very concept of our foundations of thinking, and it is because of this rupture that post-structuralism and all such radical philosophies evolved. And so he was the root cause of all these radical thinking, restructuring, rethinking, and all those epistemological break that took place in the history of literary discourses and philosophical discourses. So shall we stop now? So I think several students are waiting here for paper presentation, and they are becoming impatient. And so Srija teacher, shall we wind up now? Okay. So thank you for your patient listening, and this is a tough area indeed, I know, but you cooperated well, and thank you for your cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir.